Hey, Simon.
Hey, hey,
Good to see you. How are you doing?
doing pretty good. I'm still nursing a bit of a cold, but it's going better.
Okay. Yeah, I hope that continues to improve. I enjoyed listening to your four-way conversation on Voicecraft
Oh,
uh,
nice.
with some friends and a colleague of mine, Sean Kelly.
Yeah,
As he would say, very rich conversation. Yeah, particularly appreciated the conversation about gender and just how, I don't know, I felt like you were all very sensitive to that question, and Cadell offered a helpful um, reframe, and I thought it really synergized quite well. And yeah, I just found the conversation very moving. So thanks for your contributions to that.
excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked also the turn that that one took.
Yeah. Hey, Sam.
Hey, Matt Simon. Am I in my 12 pixel void system? No?
Yeah.
Whoa,
And your
and
audio
the
sounds
audio is like a sick echo.
very like Lord of the Rings, deep in Mordor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
where I am. Is this better?
that's better.
Yeah,
Okay,
some
perfect.
is calling in from Mordor, actually, right?
I love that. Is that a real background? Those bonsai trees? Those look amazing.
Ah, yes. Yes, they're my roommates.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
I tried to raise them. They're now starting to display their autumn phenotype, so they're losing some leaves.
Mm,
It's a nice, you know, uh, up-to-date biological clock, let's say, to tune
great.
into.
Yeah, better than a calendar.
I
Uh,
saw you also have an interesting biological clock running in the background there, no? Sitting on top of the table right now or something.
Cat.
Black cat.
where's my cat? Oh yeah, look at him. He's up there.
Hmm.
That's Philo. Um, not supposed to be up there right now, but
But he's reading, I see.
yeah, he wants to. Maybe he's gonna pay my bills. Um, yeah, still haven't gotten a rent payment from him. So,
Mm.
well, glad to be able to join both of you this morning or afternoon for you. Um, I was just telling Simon how much I appreciated his four-way conversation with Sean Kelly and Cadell Last and Layman Pascal. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, Sam.
Half of it, yeah. And
Half of
it,
it.
indeed, it's very stimulating. So every
Mhm.
10 minutes, it's a couple hours of, of thinking you can do with it. So yeah, I also
That's
liked it, yeah.
that's true. Yeah. So I know that that overlaps a bit with some of the themes we were discussing in our first conversation
Yeah.
related to Gaia. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have an agenda thought out. I wonder if either of you have some
Mm.
ideas that we might unpack, untangle, or continue to tangle.
Well, actually, I've been thinking about something the last days, and I think both of you have interesting things to say about it. And that's this idea of creativity, right? So creativity is obviously happening, and I feel that the human way of participating in this principle is through artistic expression. And what I notice in my own artistic practice, but also I hear that more often, is that it feels a lot as if you're not inventing something, but that you're more reporting or discovering. You're taking away the cover of something that's already there. And I'm also reminded of Walt Whitman, or says something like, all music is what awakens from you when you're reminded by the instruments. So it's already there, right? It's already elsewhere, and you're just stepping into it and somehow giving it actuality or form. But that then makes me wonder, what is creativity then up to, right? Is it like a way of mapping all these worlds that exist in potentia and that are there to And also, to which extent is creativity then really creative if it's already there in potentia? Like, that's also sometimes what I bump into with Whitehead and his eternal objects. It seems that all the music that we make and all the art that we make, and maybe also all the biological variants in nature, they somehow already exist. And that to me brings some friction in with like a real radical creativity.
Yeah. Who is doing the creating? I think I'm reminded of a line that Tolkien, since we're in Mordor, wrote to C.S. Lewis. He said that if God is mythopoeic, then the human being must become mythopathic, which is to say, receptive to the stories that are being told, not just by, if we're Whiteheadian, it wouldn't just be that God is the only story writer or myth maker. There would be some creative role for creatures to play in composing the story, but there is a sense in which the divine gives the deep structure of the plot. And so, I mean, Tolkien would say that, we are sub-creators. And I think, he's Catholic, and so is giving a little bit more power to the divine than, say, Whitehead would, where God's power is less as the the sole creator, but more like the conductor, who's not controlling what music the orchestra plays and the members of the orchestra play, but nonetheless offering a kind of a potential score that would be beautiful, but that actually, I think the improvisation of the members of the orchestra actually ends up heightening the intensity and the beauty that can be achieved by not simply perfectly mimicking the divine plan, but I mean, and Tolkien has this too, and in his creation narrative, where he's he has the Iluvatar singing to the Ainur, and then Melkor kind of deviates from that, and then the Iluvatar is able to reincorporate the deviation to an even grander melody. So it's there a little bit in Tolkien. It's just, he's still Catholic at the end of the day, and so God is the big omnipotent creator, whereas I think Whitehead leaves more room for creatures to not just be sub creators. Gosh, Falo's making a mess in there. But to really be participants in the creative process. And the thing with the eternal objects is, you're not the first to raise this criticism, Sam, that it might feel like it's diminishing creativity if these possibilities are sort of just there waiting to be drawn upon or ingressed and expressed. But if the realm of eternal objects is infinite, then it seems to me that somewhat mitigates the issue, because it's not like there's some finite set of possibilities that, some finite set of colors on the palette that we can draw from. It's like, no, it's infinite. And so what we choose to actualize is never, what we're, the field of possibility we're drawing on is never diminished. It's never drained. There's always infinitely more possibilities that could be drawn upon. So yeah, those are just the thoughts that occur to me initially.
Maybe I can add it.
Go ahead, Simon.
Okay, maybe I can add a bit to that. The image that came up for me, or the main feeling I'm getting from the act of creativity, especially coming from humans, I was also thinking about, for instance, birds and bird song and mating dance and all these kind of things. But the main idea I was having is, I think so much happens with these creative forces. So much happens under the hood, in the deep unconscious, or let's say in the highest of heights, and that our lens of our perception is often not on it. And I think that's where we are participating in divine creation. That's very much happening in the unconscious state. If I think, well, we can draw, I don't know. If I think the majority of the being is aligned with that, if there isn't that much unnecessary, let's say, ego structures running amok, or let's say parts of us focusing on other things. And what I sense is that we probably, the more and more we align with that trajectory of creation, and we as a expression of that creative pattern become more and more aware of what our expression is about, what we are about, what we're here to do. And then I think we as in really individually, then I think that channel widens, and then conscious mind also steps into the creative power. And then you're having conversation with dreams that are telling you this and this you should work on, or it's just flow, or things are just happening. And I think that exactly in the unconscious part of it, that's where the projection into the future takes place, or the looking for potential futures. And I don't think there's the choice. And that's, I think, what Matt was also talking about, that it's in essence limitless or endless possibilities, but it is depending on what your plan of departure is. So it is within a range of mobility that we move into the future, orienting us to certain acts of creativity as the whole thing is creating more and more. Yeah, so within a certain range. So I've never played the piano, so it would be very odd for me to then think, okay, I'm going to be creative and I'm going to be an excellent piano player, because that will be such a sharp turn to make, and create something good. Maybe I can play some notes, but yeah, that is coming up for me.
Yeah.
Would you then say that there is a striving towards something like a teleological principle, something at the end that's pulling it all in? Or because if you're saying that that these egoic structures that maybe restrict this free flow, let's say, there is sort of free flow to begin with, then, no?
Yeah,
A river
so,
also has a direction, let's say. But
yes, nice point. I think that there is an inherent direction in, yeah, a creative direction. Yeah.
Creativity requires constraints, right? And so those constraints are provided, I think, if we're talking in terms of sort of Whitehead scheme, there's constraints provided by the past, which is we want to remain in some degree in fidelity with what's already been achieved, and we can't but respond moment by moment to what we're inheriting from the past and the situation that we're in, because the creative act in the present, to be relevant, needs to in some way be sensitive to and responsive to the situation it finds itself in, including what it's inheriting from the past. So that's one form of constraint, because there's a difference between creative improvisation and randomness. That's just totally disconnected and might be novel, but it's not rhyming with what came before, and so it doesn't strike us as in any way an enhancement or artistic or beautiful. But there's also the constraint of the future, which is also about relevance in a way, and it's a subtler thing because we have to think about the structure of possibility. So not just what's already been actualized that we're inheriting from the past, but the structure of the not yet, but what might be. And that's a subtle issue because we don't want to overly front load the possibilities of the future, like overly structure them, because that starts to sound deterministic. But at the same time, what's possible in the next moment can't be totally open. So there must be certain grooves available, and a decision is made about which of those to actualize. And I think this is where Whitehead brings in his divine function, as Isabel Stengers refers to it, this lure, that is not determining which of those possibilities is decided upon, but is enticing us in each moment with those possibilities. And it seems like moment by moment, that array of future possibilities is constantly adjusting. One of my teachers and friends, Richard Tarnas, describes this as like the way that it's a crude metaphor, he admits, but the way that a GPS map, when you set your destination, if you don't make the turn that it expects you to make, it'll readjust how to get you to the same destination by different means, And so it could be that the end is the amplification of beauty, but how you get there totally depends. There are many paths, to get there. So
I
these are
like this idea
different kinds of constraints.
Yeah, this constraining principle. So it's basically this interface of the eternal, formless, non-restraint on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the restraint that is kind of putting the mold over it in a way. No? And can we then also say that all these other biological entities, such as atoms and cells, and DNA strands, and are they also doing something very similar? But then they are constrained very differently, so they have this interface and also in a very different way. And then I'm also very curious, what more is possible, right? I cannot imagine that human art is the the final mold, let's say. And I have to think about maybe mystic type of consciousness, which is the very edges of the bell curve probably in the human population. But if you read what they are writing, it seems total gibberish to me sometimes, right? But probably they have they are constrained in such a way that they can tap into this potential in such a different way compared to normal humans, let alone cells, atoms, that they can also explore these different worlds, let's say. But would you say that you're also the evolution of consciousness is somehow related to this? Like these ideas that come into, Matt, all the details about this. I'm just giving a very low resolute understanding of it. But what Hegel is also aiming at, that is dialectic evolutionary process in consciousness. That's maybe then is exactly this changing interface with the realm of potentials.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm stuck on this question about human art and creativity, and how the biological world, which and history that we inherit down to the first cells, how they could be understood also to be all of those life forms, even microorganisms, engaged in an artistic process as well, which is not just that something we could understand in terms of their own self creation, but the way that they shape and reshape environments, which seems to be part of the definition of life from the beginning. It's not just that life adapts to an environment, but adapts the environment to itself. And so there's something artistic, something artistic about the essence of life itself. And it's not just, I think Darwin was much more sensitive to the artistic side of life and the aesthetic side of evolution, but I think neo-Darwinian biology reduced this more to utility, and was thinking less in terms of the enjoyment of the organisms involved in the process of living and dying and evolving. But from a Whiteheadian perspective, life can be, it might be actually scientifically important to recognize the artistic side of life, that life is the pursuit not just of survival, but of the pursuit of various forms of flourishing and thriving, and that there's this this hunger for not just novelty but relevant novelty, and this like dipping into the infinite field of possibilities in a way that's suggestive of a kind of divine persuasion or ordering to that realm of possibilities, because it does seem that while the possibilities are infinite, there are possibilities that are adjacent to what's already been actualized, and so more relevant to what's already been actualized. And that suggests a kind of purposeful ordering of the realm of possibilities, so as to enhance beauty. And so, all of these speculations, I think, are a consequence of trying to think like, what are the conditions that make evolution possible? And we have an impoverished, the scientific materialism has a more or less impoverished view of the evolutionary process, because it's reducing life to survival mechanisms, and the pursuit of more efficient survival strategies, which is, it's kind of like the lowest common denominator. Like, it's necessary, but for life, that it survive and reproduce, but it seems not sufficient to explain the degree of beauty and diversity and complexity that's been achieved. Because if survival and reproduction were the name of the game, like, why ever go beyond bacteria? Like, they're much better at that game than complex animals, right? So there seems to be something else needing to be explained than just there's more ingredients than can just be captured by that algorithm of natural selection. There's aesthetic selection going on.
It's a good point. A stone is very good at surviving.
Right.
Why ever go with it?
I'm also thinking about, as you were speaking there, it's not, of course, limited to the way we look at biology, so within academia or the sciences. I think our culture also looks at it this way. So the eye of that being alive is a sacred act of creativity. I don't see that in the, let's say, the popular culture as a reflection of its values. It's very much also down to the survival and the bare survival with material. And let's say the consumption of experience. But experience seems to be very different than act of creation. So it's more of a consumptive act than a creative act. So I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of struck me as well. And I kind of want to circle back a little bit on the sort of the creative march. I'm seeing this image of a ever-growing organism that's on the, if you have the expanding universe, that everything is on the edge, and it's figuring out where do I want to, which potentiality do I want to grow into. So everything is in a constant moving river outwards. But then I'm thinking, what is backwards? Is the past then, because that's also a flowing river, the history. Is history done not as in carved into stone? Or are there parts that are carved into stone? Or are there still pieces where things are flowing and that history can be revisited and changed? And dreaming. I think dreaming is as a human expression is important, but I think everything probably dreams. And I think in the dreaming is the traveling towards the nearby future and figuring out what is the landscape, where can I travel into, what are my options. But it's also a way of visiting history, revisiting history, revisiting those flows. So you're almost like at night, you are either paddling upstream or you're letting yourself be floated downstream and, well, visit the past and how it's also entangled in the past with all the other flows of the other creatures and beings of the cosmos. So
yeah, I mean, the past is definitely still fluid to some degree, I would say. And while already actualized, and so in some sense, the past is given, and there might be aspects of it that are unalterable. I think there's also a sense in which the past contains its own halo of unrealized possibilities. And so what I mean is, when we remember the past, we don't just remember what actually happened, we remember what could have happened. And some of those could haves are still could haves, could be's, in other words. And so when we enter into a sort of dream state, maybe we're rehearsing things that have happened to us, reliving things that have happened to us. We're also searching the alternative pathways, right, that remain open and that we might not notice in the present, but when we consider the liveliness of the past, all of a sudden it clues us into present pathways that are still open to us.
And share a brief metaphor, Sam, and then your go. The images of these slime mold experiments that they're doing with mazes are coming up. And if we are like a slime mold organism that's moving from food source to food source and laying down these cables, let's say, when there's a most efficient route of metabolizing build, it's also exploring its space in these waves, right? These thin waves. And when it encounters something, then it strengthens that connection. So I almost had the image that dreaming and revisiting the past is like revisiting past parts of the maze to see if now there's maybe food that we have missed, also in our hurry to move to the next food. And that there is again this pulse being sent out and just to explore. Maybe we find something very, very nutritious there. And I'm also thinking about sort of a trauma release, for instance. That's a big example of that. It's traveling back in the time, releasing something so that the nutrients that are there can finally be metabolized, and then there's this fuller. The movement forward is more fully charged, let's say.
Then we have there indeed, I was also thinking about trauma and how that is basically solidified history. Don't we there have a methodology to actually do time travel by all these psycho technologies that help you release trauma, aren't they all kind of based on indeed traveling back into the past and work that out? And then I'm also curious what happens to this field of potentials when the trauma is released.
Trauma seems to overly constrain us to repeat certain patterns of behavior because there's some kind of blockage, like in the present, that doesn't let us realize certain novel possibilities. And I like this idea of time travel back to, we have to, I mean, I don't speak from experience necessarily here, but it seems like in some of the literature I've read about trauma and how, say, MDMA experience might help people recover from post-traumatic stress disorders, is a returning to the traumatic memory and sort of reliving it, but interpreting it differently, almost remembering it, an extra re there, so that, yeah, possibilities are then, new possibilities are freed up. And it's a function of shifting our interpretation of what has happened to us. You can't undo the fact, but you can change your interpretation of it, right? So the past is finished in some sense, and yet how we remember it is up for grabs.
Another image that's as you're explaining that, or as we're feeling into this, now it comes up for me. If we have the source from, let's say, the Big Bang, and then all these organismal movements start going, maybe that's a roots. So roots are growing, and the organism that is you, either through multiple reincarnations, is continuing this, your root tip. So you're the place where it divides and it's going into the future. At spaces we branch, and the roots branch towards places in the maze where, due to projection or due to imagination, we found that there's potential good nutrients there, specifically for these roots to metabolize, for these roots to take up. But trauma happens when a root grows into a rock, like initial resistance to that field. And then every now and then we revisit it, but it's just growing around that rock. So it's not managing to go through it into this field, which it initially recognized as being very, very nutritious and valuable. And so the moment that the trauma block is released, there's this whole new field of potentiality that was already there, and that the soul knows, because the soul has passed on already quite far and is aware of that. You're aware of that field being good for you, or being valuable for the creative process this time around. And then once the blockage is gone, then the whole creative process takes place. Like the whole imagining, like, oh, could this be like this? Or now I've regained my freedom, or these kind of things.
Mm. Yeah, when you were speaking of the reinterpretation, and now you also touched upon it, Simon, this valuation comes up for me. Like you re-evaluate that event, and that's maybe all you can do about it, right? And then I'm thinking again, also a bit in Whiteheadian terms, that this creative process is constantly evaluating the realm of potentials. No, so the moment you exclude a bunch of value by growing around this rock and being solidified in, you basically cut out a lot of value potential. Something feels of value there, yeah. Now, do you see that also in you work with people, Simon, that experience trauma? Does that resonate, like the re-evaluating of these experiences?
Yeah. The main thing is, I think, the revaluing, so the seeing of the gold that's behind it, or the deep value, that often comes after the initial feeling, the raw feeling of whatever happened. So that needs to be felt. But once that is open and that charge is gone, then there is room for reinterpretation, for what you could call a post-tragic interpretation or valuing. But you need that post-tragic lens only comes by going through the tragic. And so it also doesn't work to come up with post-tragic examples to people who aren't in the post-tragic space, because they still need to fully feel.
So
Yeah,
is there then
Whitehead.
also a function of trauma? Is it there for a reason?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a flag post.
Yeah, I think about the importance of childhood illnesses as not just for their quality as psychological initiations, but actually to help the immune system develop properly. And that in our effort, which is well intentioned, to live in more sanitary, sterilized environments, and again, not anti-vax, but to vaccinate maybe more than we need to. It prevents these certain threshold crossing experiences that actually, when you undergo them and struggle and the difficulty of that and come out the other side, that it's actually an enhancement of one's immune system in this case, but one's health overall. That we think of sickness as the opposite of health, and in some sense it is, but in the way that opposites can, in their interplay, actually paradoxically lead to the enhancement, of life functions. Just like constraint enhances creativity, illness actually contributes to greater health if one can be supported through the healing process. And so, yeah, there are certain traumas that, I mean, the trauma of birth itself, uh, on some level, you might think, well, we should avoid that. That's just so painful for the mother and for the infant. And yet, if life didn't push through that, we wouldn't be here. Um, and so, something about that struggle, that initial struggle to exist, and the sacrifice of the mother, like those are part of the essential ingredients. All that pain, for this new being to come into existence that's capable of experiencing greater beauty. Um, so Whitehead talks about the dream of youth and the harvest of tragedy, and that actually the highest form of beauty is tragic beauty. It's not the naive, innocent sort of appreciation of un um, of some kind of harmony achieved without struggle, but the harmony achieved after the struggle, after you really recognize that it didn't need to be this way, that it could have been, um, everything could have been destroyed, and yet something was harvested, that's richer and more beautiful because of the trauma that one has overcome, or the suffering at least.
The dark blessing of disease lies indeed, to me, also precisely in this realization that not everything is finite, but it's painful still, right? Like the phenomenology of suffering is real, but maybe so real that it's one of the most realist things out there. And to me, that's also again the second blessing of disease, is that you'll sure be very aware that you are alive.
Mhm.
And then here also is this this layman Pascal's metaphor of the bicycle, that these two pedals, one being health, one being disease, that they are constantly opposing one another, but at the same time giving a hybrid direction forward, right? And then we can think again what this direction then is. To my mind, it's something to greater depth of experience or something like that. As I said, being diseased is it's very much the same as being extremely happy in terms of the depth of experience, the texture of experience. So in that, there's a lot of value to me. But
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think of like fever dreams and Carl Jung writing Answer to Job while he's sick and suffering from this terrible fever and um, just recovering from illness, and that yeah, it does unleash this depth of perception and creativity that we wouldn't otherwise have access to when not brought to the extremes of our life. Um,
mm,
and it seems obvious looking at the history of the evolution of life on this planet that life is not so afraid of suffering that it would hold back from the pursuit of greater sensitivity because of its fear of the heightened suffering that comes along with that. It's like, no, if there's
mm,
if the possibility of more intense beauty is there, then the suffering is worth it. Um,
mm.
which I don't. It's not to downplay the suffering. It's to enhance the value of the art that is achieved despite the suffering. Maybe I can.
Do you think that?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well,
Or,
I was wondering if also religion and spiritual traditions are precisely trying to have us experience that the suffering is not meaningless and without value, because suffering inherently tells you that it's not meaningful and that it happens for no reason, and that everything you want is not to suffer when you suffer. So it's very hard to see these fruitful things that can come from it. But then maybe here's what the teacher's role can be: someone that has suffered and has seen it to the very end and can then report back, like, have faith in the good outcome of this whole process. And here again, this faith is of course like a big characteristic of spirituality and religion to me. And then some people will say it's like a childish way of working your way around it, and to make it bearable. It's like almost like a practicality. But I'm not
But
so
what
quick
is
to
the
dismiss.
what
Yeah,
is the
what's the
alternative?
alternative?
To rail against everything constantly and like fight fate, or fight the spots of the maze that you're in. When you were talking, I got like the reality of pain or the reality of suffering. I really got this image of, so being this root tip, or being the person at the root tip going in terminal velocity through a maze, and then every now and then just hitting the walls and being like scraped past the walls, and that being pain or suffering, slamming into an intersection and then having to move another way. And it's like, yeah, the pain is a signal of where the limits are. And
Mm,
then indeed you feel this maximum need of like, I have to shift, I have to make another turn. But what then comes up for me is like, if it's ongoing long suffering, is there like a big turn happening, on some scale, and I'm not wanting to let's say minimize that. Of course, there's horrible ways of suffering continuously through life, but if we keep the window open for reincarnation, let's say, then is that a like a trajectory that's being changed? Are you feeling like a constant friction of going into a limit which is steering you to something else, but which is so painful that you don't want to? No one in their right mind would commit to that.
In that maze metaphor, were you describing an average day of your PhD?
Yeah, no.
So this arc of bending towards a new direction, you say that can span multiple lifetimes. So that someone that's struggling with a chronic illness their whole life is in the arc of the cosmic life, let's say, that didn't begin at birth and doesn't end at the death of the individual, is taken into account.
Yeah.
I think of the countless generations of simpler organisms that achieved vision, evolving the eye, and that, you know, it could be that initially the rudimentary forms of sight, because of some photosensitive pigment on the membrane of a cell or something, was actually somewhat painful, and that the eye is sort of originated as a wound, but a wound, like the organism stayed with the pain because there was the slightest hint of a higher resolution perception of what's going on in the environment, and that has utility, but it also has its own intrinsic value as something beautiful. And you know, we I think we all have some sense of the fine line between pleasure and pain sometimes, and so like this organ and this perceptual capacity, which, you know, Aristotle said was the noblest of the senses, right? Our visual experience is actually the long-term consequence of not recoiling from this wounding that light initially caused to our organism. And it's a receptivity and it's like this primal trust that even if this is initially painful, it's like a trust in the goodness and the beauty of things, that, oh, if I stay with this, maybe it will flower into something else. And it seems like all of our sensory organs, we could tell a similar story.
I think for several trees, it's also the case that they only branch from damage. So where places are where the growth early is inhibited or there's a scratch, then that's a place to branch.
Yeah.
Is the experience of suffering then also increasing over time and over evolution? I mean, those worms that gained that could see shades for the first time with a very tiny scratch on their forehead. How does that compare to suffering that we can all see on the news every day? Apparently, it didn't go away, and apparently it seemed to have intensified. Well, I've never been well, I don't know actually, but not that I know of. I've not been a flatworm, so I don't know how it feels to be cut in half. But yeah, does it intensify, and why is it not away yet if suffering doesn't serve anything?
Right. Yeah, I mean, this gets real very quickly when we apply it to our contemporary human geopolitical situation. You know, I don't want to rush to some reconciling philosophical understanding of the suffering that people are enduring right now. But I think of you know, the vision of Teilhard de Chardin on the battlefield in World War One. He was a stretcher bearer, just witnessing mass mechanized death day after day after day. And that's when he has his vision of the noosphere and of the direction of human evolution. Despite this, that somehow world war for Teilhard, with his vision of the deep future, became evidence of the accelerating pace of that evolution and the rapidity of the noosphere, that despite its horrors, war was just a symptom of the growing compression of the human community and the intensification of the process by which, you know, our coevolution was accelerating. So the differences that still exist among nations and tribes and races, even, it's like he was seeing the world wars as, yeah, just evidence of the accelerating synthesis and the actual deepening of relationship of humanity. And it's a dark vision, but also I think there's a potency there.
What immediately struck me there, Matt, is endosymbiosis. Was the endosymbiosis of the mitochondria into the sort of pre-eukaryotic cell, was that also a violent act like this? Because we can, when we read it, or let's talk about myself. When I read it, there's this, oh, symbiosis. It's such a nice word, and it's such a, oh yeah, it's harmony and it's growing together. But what if we picture it like that it's forceful sort of things being pushed together, ground into each other, and then a new thing has to come out of it, has to reconstitute. So is that a endosymbiosis happening on a certain level?
Yeah, I mean, that when you know, a cell ate the first, you know, mitochondria, I assume it was hoping to digest it.
Yeah, and the
This was,
mitochondria immediately want to leave. Also,
yeah,
a lot of killing in that phase, I think. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I mean, organisms are hungry. Like life eats itself, and there's a tremendous violence in that. And we might like to wish it away and wonder if evolution could have proceeded in a less violent way than it has. But we don't live in the best of all possible worlds. We live in a creative universe that is seeking intensity of experience and not just the mere prolongation of life, you know, as an end in itself. And so it could be that these predator prey dynamics are the most efficient way of generating more complex life forms. And sometimes, despite itself, that seemingly competitive process leads to endosymbiosis and symbiogenesis. Um, so that it's like the natural world is more like a trickster than it is either simply demonic or angelic. It's like you might think that this is pretty evil what's happening, and then all of a sudden a flip happens and you see, oh wow, greater beauty has been brought forth as a result of something that seems so violent. And this is hard. I mean, there's this grates against our deep moral intuitions on some level, but um, you know, morality can function as a tremendously conservative force at various points. Like, you know, Whitehead jokes at some point about like the first sea creature to go onto the land for a minute and then to come back into the ocean was probably totally ostracized by its fellow fish or whatever. Like, you know, you're not one of us anymore. Like, get away from us. you're evil, you're wrong, you're whatever. And so that attitude to conserve the order that's been achieved and the relative harmony that's been achieved is actually cannot function in a profoundly conservative way and inhibit the freedom of individuals to try something new. And so yeah, this it's complex to think across the artificial morality of our human cultures and the creativity that produced us and is continuing to shape us. And that's a tension to hold, I think. I wouldn't want to suggest that we just flout all, all of the moral habits we've acquired, but we have to hold them with some irony and humility.
Well put. Maybe a side note also is that if experience is indeed intensifying constantly, then it's not only the experience of suffering that's intensifying, right? I think we can then extrapolate this effect over the whole emotional palette, the emotional spectrum that exists, right? So aesthetic appreciation and well, feelings of love and harmony, and those things perhaps also intensify, and that's also giving some hope in times where suffering is so painfully obvious.
I think that's beautiful. I also think for me the word excruciating comes up. So it's just the excruciating intensity of everything. So excruciating joy or excruciating pain, or that's just
That word says it all, yeah. Excruciating.
yeah.
Yeah.
Does that sound also excruciating to you, Matt, as a native hearer of this word?
I like that choice. It's a good English term for what we've been describing. And I just think of the value of justice and how important it is to us and how it's always evolving. Like what would be considered just at one period in human history is not what would be considered just in another. And yet this is an ultimate value, but we're only ever seeing its true ideal nature through a glass darkly, and we're hopefully constantly refining our sense of what the just is. But if we weren't failing as a species to live up to the ideal of justice that we have, then when we do achieve it, however temporarily or faintly, it wouldn't strike us as so tremendously valuable. And so, these struggles for justice continue right now. And yeah, I suppose as we, have to come to a close here, I don't want to leave the impression that that there aren't real moral struggles and that in some instances there aren't clear forks in the road in terms of what would bring more justice into the world and what would allow injustice to continue. It's just that historically, how we define justice is not, it's a moving target. And that requires, I think, a more creative relationship to the good and to morality, so as to avoid the danger of that kind of conservatism I was talking about, while also not being so brazen and insensitive to suffering that we, just because we can't have a fixed sense of what justice is, that we no longer strive to realize ever more enhanced examples of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think it comes here we can also use the framing of the pre-tragic, the tragic, and the post-tragic, and also how we approach these things. The struggle for justice within the tragedy unfolding is super real, and that struggle is necessary. And the post-tragic is only in after the tragedy where it can be reevaluated and seen. So, yeah.
Mm. I like the idea of justice as an aesthetic principle of harmonization. And these ever more inclusive forms of justice are actually incorporating more internal diversity and complexity into the harmonization which is achieved. Right.
Yeah.
Lovely. If either of you have not yet read Whitehead's Adventures of Ideas, there's a couple of sections towards the end of that book, chapters towards the end of that book on beauty and truth, and he articulates his understanding of art. I would recommend, just in light of everything we've talked about, that you two check that out. I think you'd appreciate it, and it might, provide a basis for a future conversation to continue to deepen these themes. Whitehead would say the entire evolution of the universe was already an artistic expression, and that our own human form of consciousness is a product of this artistic longing in the natural world. And it's with the birth of consciousness that this artistic impulse becomes aware of itself for the first time, whereas before it had been this sort of groping that was far more just a matter of there's an unconscious longing for more beauty, but less in the way of conscious cultivation and the cultivation of the conditions so as to intentionally enrich that artistic expression. And so Whitehead would say he says art is the education of nature, self-education of nature. But it's like the universe gradually learning how to accelerate this process of the enrichment of experience.
Then the immediate thought that comes to me, and it has been pressing the whole conversation, but I've found no way in, but I think it fits. What does overshoot on the noosphere look like? And now with generative AI generating art, is it art or is it, what is it? And how does this interact with this principle that you just mentioned?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there might be a sweet spot between being overly artificial and being naively natural, or overthinking what it would mean to be natural, like natural flavors in food products, whatever. What does that mean? Because one can be you can't be deliberately natural. It 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 kind of happens when you let go of control, and it seems like the AI craze is a function of the pursuit of ever more control of the artistic process. It's so extractive of human creativity. I mean, it's just a mimicry of what humans have created that fed into the training data, and that is what's fueling this generative artificial intelligence.
So Matt, I know that me and Sam have had some strange discussion on the metaphysics of AI, but this is for me also a very fruitful terrain to investigate. Like, does generative AI also, how does it interact with the noosphere, and what are the dynamics here? So that's a very valuable, I think, a very nutritious field to enter.
Making a note for next time. I would love to yeah, dive into that with both of you. That question's coming up a lot. I'm being asked to write about the ethics of generative AI from a philosophical point of view. And I admit to being a bit uncertain about how to proceed in that. So it'd be great to learn from you two about how you've been exploring it.
Excellent.
Well, sorry I can't spend more time with y'all, but this was fun.
Another
Go.
100 mental seeds being planned tonight.
Yes. And some you're going back into the depths of
I'm
Mordor
going back
now.
into the depths of Mordor, yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Okay, hope to see you later, guys.
Nice. Yeah, lovely to be in dialogue. But hope you both have a good night. And
Yes.
I'll follow up on email. We can find another time to chat in the next few weeks.
Cheers.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thanks,
See you,
man. Thanks, Simon. Bye-bye.